Hello to Noah, Matthew, and Bob. And before I get started, I just want to say that I am sure that no matter how you pronounced my name, I'm sure it was perfect. No, but people do sometimes have trouble pronouncing my name just based on reading it. So I will say that the correct way to pronounce my name, it is Anthony. So my observation is about the restored cut of Animal Crackers, which I was actually lucky enough to see in a theater the first time that I saw it. And one very cool thing about these deleted scenes or these scenes that have been restored is that it feels like the closest that we will get to seeing the Marx Brothers improvise on stage. You know, because you're watching a movie that you've seen, 100 times or whatever, and all of a sudden, in the middle of a scene that you have memorized, they start doing new jokes. And it's like, what is this? That wasn't how that scene was supposed to go. So I'm sure as we keep watching them, that novelty will wear off. But there's something very thrilling about the idea that they're kind of going off script, which, must have been, if you'd seen them on stage multiple times, then I'm sure that you had some kind of experience like that where, the scene went one way one night and the other way another night. So that is one of the really fascinating things about these scenes is not only is it new footage, but it's, it's kind of new footage inside the old footage. So we're not just experiencing something new, we're also recontextualizing things that we already know. So... All right, well, thank you for your time, and I'm going to start on my notes for Monkey Business. Thanks again.
Hello, this is Council Member Pat McCahey from Chicago. I rewatched Animal Crackers and came up with some sparkling conclusions and a host of analytic points. Unfortunately, I then reread the Animal Crackers section of Matthew's The Annotated Marx Brothers and realized that Matthew had already come to most of my sparkling conclusions before I did. So let's just get on with this meeting of the Matthew Conium Appreciation Council. I have one point to develop a bit and one point where I'll push back on the Right Honorable Mr. Conium. Matthew, you write a bit about the supporting players, but I'd go further and say that this is the best supporting cast the brothers ever had. Margaret Dumont, of course, Lillian Roth, Louis Soren, and Robert Grieg as Hives, who Matthew calls wonderfully sepulchral, and I'll have to take his word on that one. But my contention is that they're the best because they seem to be having a lot of fun. They're not trying to beat Harpo to a pulp or kick Groucho down a flight of stairs. They're just kind of strapped in and bouncing along for the ride. It's sort of a stand-in for the audience. Inexplicable and bemusing things are happening rapidly, and we're all just seeing what's going to happen next. I disagree with Matthew's assessment of Victor Herbert's direction as too stagey. I think long shots and minimal editing takes work well to capture all the Mark zany running about and to approximate how choreographed and kinetic they must have seemed on stage. There's a single take in the bridge game that goes on for 2 minutes and 36 seconds, which I think is just how it should be done. There's so much moving in the frame, I never noticed that the frame's not moving. Except for the one bit of business that really needs a long shot and a long take, the knife dropping, and for that we get close-ups. Serves us right for not seeing them live. There's one thing that I saw in my rewatching that I found intriguing. I believe there's a sequence where we can see Harpo in his red stage wig. I'll pause now while everyone tees up the movie on YouTube and gets to the hour, 16-minute, and 45-second mark. Harpo is just chasing a blonde who ran away and slammed a door. He licks a lollipop and crawls under a dresser with his blonde wig on. Then Lillian Roth and some guy, who I wasn't looking at because he's not Lillian Roth, come in a very wide shot. Harpo is under the dresser, and I think his wig is dark. It's not a shadow because as the shot plays out, we can see his right hand and his face, which aren't particularly dark. After about 15 seconds, we then cut to a close-up of Harpo crawling out, wearing his blonde wig again. In the next scene, Lillian Roth and the guy who isn't Lillian Roth, so who cares, are talking to Groucho about the missing painting. Groucho finds a hair on the guy's jacket and says, "A clue. No, a hair. A red hair." And Lillian Roth, because she's smart as well as cute as a button, says, "The professor." I don't think They put Harpo in his red wig just to justify that line, and they could have just changed the line. But I'm mystified. So that's my contribution, and I thank you all for everything you do to keep the Marx flag flying.
Hello everyone, this is Patrick Johns from London with a few thoughts, observations and questions about Animal Crackers. Now, I didn't encounter this film until I'd seen most of the others, so initially I did find it a little bit wooden before I understood really that it was the film of a play. Anyway, before I get on to some of my favourite Marx Brothers moments, there are a couple of negatives for me, and they're the slightly wooden jokes by the supporting cast. For me, they're just not particularly funny jokes. They're not worthy of the films, and they're delivered in a really, really wooden way. And yes, I understand that it's a play, but even so, I was trying to get my wife and kids into the Marx Brothers, and the looks that I got when they heard these jokes were akin to, honestly, do you find this kind of thing funny? Anyway, look, here are the two offenders.
Captain Spaulding as guest of honour will have the green duplex with the 2 bars.
2, madam?
Why, yes. I think the captain would like 2 bars, don't you?
Well, if he's just returned from Africa, he may need 2 bars.
And then this one.
Oh, Mrs. Whitehead.
Arabella.
May I present Mr. Parker? Oh, of the Massachusetts Parkers?
Why, no.
Oh, then the Southern Parkers. Oh, no, the Central Parkers. The benches and trees. I see.
I can't imagine anybody really laughing out loud at those, but I'm happy to be corrected. And now just a few queries that I would love it if someone could answer. Why is it that Jeffrey is spelt the American way with the J in the credits, but with the G, the British way, in the newspaper article? Did no one at the time pick up on that? Why does Roscoe W. Chandler not have a W in the credits? Now, I'm not an artist, but is it really possible to fold up expensive paintings like that? It looks like they're folding up a bedsheet, and it's not just the brothers who do it. Several times different people fold up these paintings as if it's just like a tablecloth. And finally, has anyone else noticed the continuity error with the trombone that Chico brings in at the start? And I have to finish with this. Some absolutely sensational one-liners that I can't remember getting mentioned or praised anywhere else, but they're some of my favourites. The first is a great example of Groucho throwing an insult and then following up immediately with another.
Now, with this insurance policy you have provided for your little one and for your old age, which will be here in a couple of weeks now, if I'm any judge of horseflesh.
And then there's this wonderful line from Chico just before the game of bridge, and this is a line that I always use when playing cards.
Now, how do you want to play, honest?
And finally this, another great example of the brothers' rebellion against convention and just beautiful rudeness.
Captain, I hope you were distressed by last night's unfortunate occurrence.
You mean that dinner you served?
Anyway, those are just a few thoughts from me. Thank you all for the podcast. I absolutely love listening to it, re-listening to it, and learning more and more each time.
Kathy Beale here with a couple of comments about Animal Crackers. Let's start with Mrs. Rittenhouse. There's something fundamentally incongruous about this character. She's so proper. She dresses from a time period other than high fashion of the 20s, and yet she's living in this incredibly up-to-the-moment Art Deco home. That doesn't make any sense. Is she new money? Is this nouveau riche? She presents herself as if she's old money, but living on the Gold Coast, why would old money be in a house that looks like that? And speaking of incongruity, she is a seasoned bridge player. Why does she put up with Harpo and Chico's shenanigans in the bridge game for so long? Is she simply being tolerant? It is clear to anyone who has played more than passing bridge that something is seriously off with what they're doing, and yet she soldiers on and soldiers on like a character in a farcical sitcom, putting up with a situation that in reality nobody would. And then switching gears to Groucho. Groucho, in his wonderfully surreal bits with Mrs. Rittenhouse and Mrs. Whitehouse together, particularly in the moments when he goes off into the Eugene O'Neill parody reverie, Groucho in this scene shows just how much in just one film he has become comfortable with being on camera. His performance is so nuanced in this section, rolling his eyes in a way that wouldn't have read for most of the theater. And the section particularly, he shot her a glance as a smile played around his lips. Incredibly nuanced. It's being played to the much more intimate camera and not to the back of a theater. And finally, I just want to gloat that I was at the Film Forum for the first screening of the restored Animal Crackers when seconds were added back in that were too blue decades ago. And there was such a buzz and a sense of excitement to see the film as it was meant. It didn't matter that only a line or two was new. It was an intoxicating and glorious experience. Thank you, Matthew and Noah and Bob, for doing this. That's all for now.
Well, hello there, fellow Marx Brothers Council members and eavesdroppers. This is John Tefteller with my Animal Crackers story. During the period of about 1972, 1973, I was living in Los Angeles, California. The big theater to watch Marx Brothers films, and yes, you could see them in regular big theaters on big screens back then. The big theater was a place called the Old Movie Theater and Motion Picture Hall of Fame. It was located across the street from Disneyland in Anaheim, California, and they would show Marx Brothers films sometimes 2-3 times a week because they operated 7 days a week. Sometimes a few weeks would go by and they'd show other things, but they were always showing Marx Brothers films. Now, this is 1972, 73. Animal Crackers was not legally available to be shown anywhere, but there were bootleg prints around, and the Old Movie Theater and Motion Picture Hall of Fame did show Animal Crackers on multiple occasions before the official re-release in 1974. What was special one day, and only one day, is wherever they rented the print from, and I do not know the answer to this, I wish I did, but wherever they rented the print of Animal Crackers from, they showed it for a period of 4 or 5 nights, over 4 or 5 nights, and the print that they showed was completely sepia tone in color. It was not black and white. It was black and white, I guess, technically, but the print was sepia tone. And it was a rich, dark, wonderful version of sepia tone that made it almost look like it was a color print. The images were just gorgeous in this print. It looked like a pretty much first or second generation print, but printed with sepia tone color. I have asked people for decades since if anyone else has ever seen this particular print, and nobody has said they have. So I don't know where the print came from. I don't know where the print went, but it was the best experience of watching Animal Crackers outside of the newly restored version, which of course is the best of all. But back in 1972, 73, nobody was doing film restorations, and nobody had a complete print of Animal Crackers like the British Film Institute came up with for the recent Universal Blu-ray releases.
So, Animal Crackers. Hi, this is Jesse Levy. I first saw it at the Sutton Theater in New York City in 1974. So I want to thank Steve Stolier for his efforts in that. Thank you, Steve. I should also thank the Brits for finding the complete copy of the film. I'll just thank you, Matthew, as a representative of all the Brits. Thank you, Matthew. I watched the Blu-ray again with the new footage and the quote-unquote new footage, and listened to the deep dive in episode 50 again. But I might still have some redundancy. The doctors tell me there's nothing they can do. Okay. First of all, about the opening credits. Because there were 2 glaringly bad edits, the sedan chair and I'll show you a thing or three, That happened twice. And no editor is listed in the opening credits. I looked at the continuity credit, and it's a fellow named Pierre Collings. Now, this is interesting because he was born in Canada in 1900 to two Americans, Olive and Otto. How he avoided an O name, we'll never know. He had already been a writer and a cinematographer since 1925, and he won 2 Oscars for the story of Louis Pasteur. He won original story and screenplay. Incredible, right? He died in 1937. He's only 37 years old, possibly from embarrassment about his work on animal crackers. Actually, it was pneumonia in North Hollywood. Might have just been from being in North Hollywood. I don't know. Okay, in the opening song. In the opening song, Hives sings, "He craves attention. He's one of those men. Boy, does he ever." Groucho makes a great petulant and impatient face while he's sitting in the chair when Chico comes in. I think that was really good acting on Groucho's part. There's a car horn honking that announces Captain Spaulding's arrival. Then, unexpectedly, he comes in a sedan chair carried by 4 natives and 2 more natives carrying his guns. Were they all in the car? With the chair and the guns? It just cracks me up. And I love his eyebrow waggle on his entrance. I had the subtitles on, and I had never understood some of the Captain Spaulding theme song words. And so I was amused by, "Most heartily we'll greet him with plain and fancy cheering until he's hard of hearing." Like, what? What's plain cheering? What's fancy cheering? And they're going to do this until he goes deaf? I thought that was amazing. Also, something I noticed a long time ago, that the Hooray for Captain Spaulding song contains a little piece or a little rhythmical callback to Mozart's Eine kleine Nacht music. Never say that while you're eating grapes. It goes, the Mozart piece goes da 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 da, which sounds to me like the African explorer, hooray for Captain Spaulding, the African explorer, da 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 da, right? And I thought, did Kalmar and Ruby do this purposely, or subconsciously, or accidentally, or did they just out and out steal it? You know, I've always noticed that. It's always been amazing to me. Okay. That looks like a real caterpillar on Captain Spaulding's lapel, because it changes position during his opening song. Can anyone confirm this? After Harpo flicks ashes into Chico's trombone, Groucho tries it too. Grace Carpenter is Mrs. Whitehead's sister, not her daughter, not her friend. They mention this, that she's her sister. And also, why are there 2 mentions of suicide within the first 18 minutes of the film? One by Arabella and one by Grace. She says, "We might just shoot ourselves." I'm like, okay. I wrote down here, Lillian Roth's dimples. So cute. Okay. Groucho's throwaway line when he kneels down by Margaret Dumont, you know, he pulls his pant leg up and kneels on the other pant leg. He says, "You've been affected like this. Well, you will be." What? Is he going to get her on her knees? It's pretty racy, pretty funny. I never understood the line when Groucho's talking to Chandler. "You were close, though, and you still are, I'll bet." So I looked up the word close. Close also means hot and stuffy and not generous in giving or spending. And it also means secretive. So I guess that could apply to Chandler. If anybody knows any other reason why that joke is there, please let me know. In the bridge game scene, when Harpo has the mock battle with Mrs. Rittenhouse, I always thought the bell was just a sound effect that they threw in, but there's an actual bell on the left side of the screen. You can see it. That has been rung. It moves. So it must have been hit by somebody off camera. Margaret Dumont is really enjoying Harpo's shuffling of the cards. She's got a great amused reaction. Look. It always bothered me to gag about California and there's rain on one side of the room and sun on the other side when they're supposed to be on Long Island. Chandler says to Mrs. Rittenhouse that he has an even greater surprise for her in the library, prompting Groucho's dirty-minded reaction of, which I noticed, which I thought was really funny. When Mrs. Whitehead suggests to Hives that they use the professor as a scapegoat, she says, "That's the fellow in the woodpile." I'm glad they cleaned up that expression. It's a pretty racist term. The first shot of Harpo's harp solo is one of the few, maybe the only one that I can think of, where you see him using one of the foot pedals on the harp to change the pitch of the strings. Also, he whistles off-key at the end of his whistling part. No one else notices that Harpo's using the Bogart as a blanket when he's sleeping out on the bench. And then Harpo smacks Mrs. Whitehead on the butt with the newspapers, which to me was the most surprising and shocking of the quote-unquote new footage. She says, when they're sitting there, "You know what I want," and his response is the dirtiest leer I've ever seen Harpo give. And Harpo also does a nice stunt climbing up to John Parker's room. I guess that really was Harpo. Can anyone confirm that? John Parker says he can't paint Chandler's portrait because he and Arabella... Let me start that again, a little phlegm there. John Parker says he can't paint Chandler's... Let me try again. Sorry, Bob. John Parker says he can't paint Chandler's portrait because he and Arabella are going to be busy all day. And as they walk out, she winks and says, "Get it?" Pretty racy stuff. By the way, Parker muffs that line. No pun intended. And something else I noticed about all the films, and I've slipped over into 8 minutes and change, but all the films, all the Marx Brothers films, have some crime element. In The Coconuts is stolen jewels. Animal Crackers is stolen painting. Monkey Business is kidnapping. Horse Feathers is also kidnapping. Duck Soup, there's theft of peanuts. Okay, something. And maybe an illegal war. Night at the Opera, there are stowaways. Day at the Races, there's stealing the sanitarium. And there's doctor fraud. And, of course, the Tootsie Fruitsying. In Room Service, they're stealing the hotel room and services. At the Circus, there's stolen money. Go West is a stolen deed. And Groucho's being fleeced in the beginning. Big Store, there's a murder to get the store. Night in Casablanca, there's jewels and art treasures that were stolen. Love Happy, the stolen jewels, and the incredible jewel robbery. Who wrote these movies? The Coen brothers? All right, thank you guys. You always do a great job.
Hi, Matthew, Noah and Bob. This is Aaron Nugent from Bedford in the UK, which is about 60 miles north of London. Just wanted to say thanks for the podcast. Really love it. Love being on the council and for inviting us council members to contribute as well. So a few points on Animal Crackers that I thought I'd make. For me, Animal Crackers is one of the best Marx Brothers movies. It's got the best entrances, Margaret Dumont, Groucho's trademark song, Hello Must Be Going, harp and piano solos, and most importantly, all of the funny scenes with the brothers either all together or in mini teams, paired off against each other, which I think is brilliant. Groucho's performance in Coconuts was subdued, but then brilliantly energetic in Animal Crackers. So I was wondering, what did Groucho do between films to improve his performance? All I can think of is, like any good sportsman or performer, he watches back his performance and kind of critiqued it, and then identified where he could make those adjustments to get a better performance. So he just had so much more energy in Animal Crackers and came across so much better. But it'd be interesting to see if you had any thoughts on what he might have learnt in between those movies to transform his performance like that, where Harpo and Chico, and to some extent Zeppo, were quite consistent between the movies.
Hi, this is Cinco Paul with my top 20 best and top 10 worst moments from Animal Crackers. Well, let's start with the best. I'll do this in chronological order. These are things that after all these years and numerous repeat viewings still delight me. 1, well, if you do, it's a tough break for both of you. Groucho's line. 2, Chico's line. You couldn't afford it. 3, Groucho's dance in Hooray for Captain Spaulding. 4, Groucho rolling up his pants, then kneeling on the other leg. 5, Groucho's strange interlude. 6, Harpo stealing Chandler's birthmark. 7, if you take cranberries and stew them like applesauce, it tastes much more like prunes than rhubarb does. 8, what do you think of at night when you go to bed, you beast? 9, the bridge game. 10, see if there was anyone over there, he'd see him, wouldn't I? 11, I can't think of the finish. That's strange, I can't think of anything else. 12, the anvil chorus. 13, Groucho's fish callback. Did you lose that fish again? 14, why am I so romantic? 15, you left out the main one, too. 16, together we can solve this in no time, especially if you go home. 17, pick a number between 1 and 10. That's right. 18, well, then of course we gotta build one. Well, now you're talking. 19, that's right, maybe there was no painting, I saw it. And 20, the teapot. And now here are my top 10 worst things in Animal Crackers. 1, Chandler's, well, maybe I'm wrong. And then his face. Leave the jokes to the Marx Brothers. No one wants that. 2, Groucho and the Caterpillar. 3, Rittenhouse and Whitehead. The captain is so amusing. Isn't he charming? Ha 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 ha. I'd rather they react realistically to him. 4, there's one thing I've always wanted to do before I quit. Retire. The 7-cent 5, the 7-cent nickel bit. 6, bagging the tigers to go away. I'd bag this kind of bad pun to go away. 7, the moose and mouse confusion. 8, the Margaret Dumont Zeppo Marx scene that nobody was asking for. 9, how did Grace's painting get on the terrace? Chico and Harpo switch John's for the Bogard, then Hive switches John's for Grace's and puts it in the closet. Harpo, I think, steals Grace's during that second blackout, and then he steals John's from the closet and the original from the cupboard, I guess. But the next morning, Harpo's only got the original and John's. Why was Grace's on the terrace? 10, that can't be spinach, where's the egg? Anyway, it was a joy watching this movie again. It's right up there with my current favorite, Horse Feathers. I love Animal Crackers.
Hi, Fred Sullivan from Manchester in the UK here. I'm never going to be famous or celebrated enough to be a guest on the podcast, so this might be the only chance I get to give my Marx Brothers origin story, which began in about 1993 or 94 when my brother David and I became big fans of Laurel and Hardy because they were shown every day during the summer holidays on BBC Two in the UK. We lapped up Stan and Ollie, and because I was getting into classic cinema at the time, I was eager to see whether there was other comedians from that era who I might like just as much. But accessing them was hard because apart from Stan and Ollie, other teams' films weren't shown on the telly as much. But my dad had received, as a Christmas present, 2 VHS tapes, one of Monkey Business and one of Animal Crackers. So I thought, well, I'll give these guys a go. And Animal Crackers was the one that I decided to pick first. I'll be completely honest with you, I had virtually no idea what the hell was going on the first time I watched it. I would have been about 11 or 12, I guess. But there was, as many people I'm sure would say, there was something there that made me come back. And I saw Monkey Business, and then Horse Feathers and Duck Soup were shown on telly not long after, and Night at the Opera and Day at the Races. And I went from there. I really think that it's the film where all 4 of the brothers are probably shown to their best advantage. I think even if you don't think Animal Crackers contains their best performance for each of them, it's probably in the top 2 or 3. But in particular, Harpo, as a child, Harpo was the easiest one to hook you in. And I really think Harpo is genuinely amazing in this film. He has loads of brilliant, big set pieces, particular favourites being threatening to break Mrs. Whitehead's arm, but also setting up the bridge table, or rather stopping Robert Grieg from setting up the bridge table. I absolutely love that moment. But part of the reason I loved Laurel and Hardy so much was because of Ollie's little gestures. And actually, Harpo is a master at these tiny little gestures as well that just make me laugh out loud. And my favourite in this is his very first appearance at the top of the stairs. He's introduced, we hear the music, he wanders over next to Hives, and he gives this almost imperceptible little nod that is very much a kind of a my good man sort of motion. And it makes me laugh so much every time. So a real tour de force from Harpo. The film has lots of quite subtle moments that I think you might not notice unless you've seen it a few times. And some of my particular favourites are, I'm sure there's a bit in Why Am I So Romantic where Hal Thompson accidentally headbutts Lillian Roth, which I hadn't noticed before this most recent viewing. And also how noisy Hive's shoes are throughout the entire film. Everybody's looking off to the side of the camera as if there's a live audience there as well, which is very early cinema and is kind of delightful. Two occur in the Hunga Dunga scene though, and one of them is when Groucho goes to whip Jamison. Zeppo barely gets out of the way, like he almost gets it. He moves the very, very minimum amount he needs to move to avoid getting hit. And the other part I'd noticed this time was when they talk about getting the police, Zeppo and Groucho share a look, which I think gives some credence to the idea that these guys are not who they say they are. They are total frauds. They share that glance, and it seems to say, oh no, the last thing we need is the police turning up here. There is a couple of questions I've got, though, about jokes that maybe I don't understand. Maybe I need to go back to Matthew's book to look them up. But one of them is when they're going in to view the painting. Groucho makes a joke about how does Mrs. Rittenhouse pay Hives? And I think he says by the hour or by the pound. And then as he's gone through the door, he says something else that sounds like pay him by the fire. I must have misheard that. So if you can explain that for me, that'd be great. And then when the lights go out, Groucho makes the joke about, have you found that fish again? Is that as risque a joke as my incredibly dirty mind thinks it is? Anyway, thanks very much, as always, for the podcast and for taking these submissions. And have a Merry Christmas and a Happy Hanukkah.
Hello, this is Emily Malik. Thank you for allowing fans to come on to share various thoughts about Marx Brothers films. To continue my Marx Brothers movie/food review, I give Animal Crackers a meal consisting of pork tenderloin, homemade mashed potatoes, tons of stuffing, raw spinach, and for dessert, animal crackers. Knowing how many cooks were in the kitchen while making the film, it's amazing how it turned out to be one of the very best. This was the first movie of theirs that I watched. My dad is a huge Marx Brothers fan, and Animal Crackers is his favorite. One day, when I was about 7 or 8, he sat me down and popped in a VHS of it. Also, he loves to cook and will do so at any opportunity. I remember enjoying the first half of the flick a lot. I laughed out loud during the opening sequence, especially at Harpo's reveal, as well as the A.B. the Fishman and the card game scenes, and Mr. Ravioli! Also, the songs were amazing, and they have every right to be fondly remembered by fans. But I got bored during the second half because of how sluggish it was. Rewatching it years later, I still get a kick out of the same scenes I mentioned earlier, and I find myself enjoying more of the second half despite its pacing issues. In other words, it's like encountering a lot of fattened pork, but I eat it nonetheless because it's just that tasty. In addition, I'm surprised at the amount of sweetness it has without being saccharine, especially when Groucho is flirting with Margaret Dumont, especially the Yahoo! And the Why Am I So Romantic scene. It's like adding the right amount of honey to a pork tenderloin, which I definitely recommend you doing that. Overall, this movie is one of my favorites in the same way that a pork tenderloin meal I described earlier is. This world would be a better place if more people watched Animal Crackers.
Hello all, this is Scott K. Ratner. 5 minutes, huh? I think I can pull it off. Here goes. I regard Animal Crackers as the point at which the Marx Brothers not only reached their zenith of greatness in film, but also first landed on the concept allowing for that greatness. For it is in Animal Crackers that their already developed characters finally, if only temporarily, inhabit what I deem the ideal context for those personas, satire. True, earlier Marx works had moments of satire, but this is the first to have it as a surrounding framework, the first to qualify wholly as satire. Now, besides being that which closes on Saturday night, satire is the use of irony or ridicule to expose the follies of human nature. It often entails topicality, but there's nothing inherently satirical about topicality. Indeed, much topical humor is based on nothing more than recognition and familiarity. You mention a current event, you get a laugh. And I'd say that's largely true of the Coconuts, despite George S. Kaufman being in charge. Sure, there's a few jabs about the bandwagon mindset of a land boom, but for the most part, the script's references to current events contain little social criticism, and at most, they're individual jokes. On the other hand, satire is the very essence of Animal Crackers. Despite boasting some of the best individual Marx Brothers gags, there's one overriding joke in Animal Crackers, not the outlandish behavior of the Marxes, but the response of the non-Marx Brother characters to that outlandishness. The satirical point here is that we humans are incapable of recognizing truth outside our preconceptions, and unwilling to discard those preconceptions even in the face of the strongest contradictory evidence, which, let's face it, is something Captain Spaulding offers generously. The joke isn't limited to the Gilbert and Sullivan chorus echoes of Hooray for Captain Spaulding, but extends throughout the film in the mindless adulation from such characters as Roscoe W. Chandler, who deems Spaulding's 7-cent nickel idea worthy of serious consideration, Mrs. Whitehead, who finds his insultings fascinating, and Captain Hennessy, who instantly confers command of the Long Island Police to him on the basis of an invisible calling card. But the dynamic is most highly exemplified in the character of Mrs. Rittenhouse. For unlike in The Coconuts or A Night at the Opera, where she displays a modicum of doubt regarding Groucho, here Margaret Dumont occupies what I describe as a self-healing bubble of delusion, a bubble which can be punctured momentarily by Groucho's most outrageous insults and non sequiturs, yet restores to unalloyed admiration within seconds. This satirically reflects our immense capacity to ignore or justify that which doesn't fit our preconceptions, the supreme power of confirmation bias. Cognitive dissonance may briefly vex us, but we quickly find ways to restore our beloved beliefs and prejudices. And that Mrs. Rittenhouse can be likable despite embodying this great human flaw is a credit to the supreme charm of Margaret Dumont. Admittedly, society's perception of Spaulding dominates the film's satiric content. So while Chico and Harpo's material in this film is among the best of their careers, their characters point up only the pomposity of individuals, not the stupidity of the masses. Still, their characters align with the film's primary satire, and they certainly get plenty of opportunities to shine. Hell, even Zeppo gets a few choice moments in the dictation scene. It's just that as the satirical focus in a work that is primarily satire, Groucho naturally gets the spotlight. Now, it's been argued that the Marxists and the writers weren't intentionally aiming for satire, and I agree that's probably true, but at the same time entirely irrelevant, just as the fact that I've never purposely aimed for poverty hasn't kept my finances from disarray. Animal Crackers is satire, as is Horse Feathers and Duck Soup, 3 of their most highly regarded works, it should be noted. While Monkey Business, a wondrous anomaly lacking the cult of celebrity status for Groucho, is not, but nonetheless succeeds beautifully on its relentless energy, wit, and the talkie's newfound fluidity. But after Duck Soup, we lose it. Sure, there's much to be said for A Night at the Opera, but the primary satirical structure is gone, and the Marxes, especially Groucho, are thus inevitably diminished. The problem is not musical interludes. Music was always a key element in their films, or the desire to help young lovers. After all, they were really always on the side of Arabella and John Parker, even if they didn't make a big show of it. Or even that Groucho gets kicked downstairs, but rather that Groucho's character becomes someone anyone could ever even consider kicking downstairs. By making the outside world a more real, less caricatured target of satire, the Marxists are suddenly less invincible, less majestic, and from this point on, increasingly in danger of looking like silly old men. But it was glorious while it lasted. Tell me, dear, why am I so pedantic?
At 11:20, Chico enters carrying a trombone.
That isn't his instrument. Chico should enter carrying a piano. At 13 minutes, Harpo was introduced as the professor, and he enters smoking a cigarette. If Harpo is trying to pass himself off as a professor, he should smoke a pipe. Around 1340, he blows bubbles with smoke in them. Would this be more difficult if he smoked a pipe instead of a cigarette? I have no idea about such things. At 1348, Mrs. Rittenhouse tells the butler Hives to take Harpo's hat and coat, but when he does that, he completely forgets the hat. At 1830, the boyfriend says, I had a cousin who made $50,000 on Wall Street last year. Animal Crackers started as a stage show in 1928, considering that the stock market crashed in October 1929, and this film was released in 1930. I'm surprised that line survived, and this character seems to be wishing he was in the stock market to make a lot of money. There's a lot of Art Deco in these sets, and at 1853, I think the chairs are Bauhaus style. Mrs. Rittenhouse's taste in decor is more cutting-edge than I would have expected. At 2604, Chico calls Harpo Paisan. That's the second movie in a row that he's done this. Now I'm going to go way out on a coincidental tangent. At 2850, Groucho says, I'm Jeffrey T. Spaulding. I bet you don't know what the T stands for. Chandler incorrectly guesses Thomas. Years later, there was another occasion when Groucho wanted to know what a T stood for, and in that case, it was Thomas. This was in his correspondence with T.S. Eliot, which I enjoyed reading in the book The Groucho Letters. Groucho thought it sounded silly to address someone as T.S., so he found out T.S. Eliot's first name and started his letters to him, Dear Tom. For podcast episode 50, the three regular podcasters were joined by Heidi. Later in the podcast is a discussion about censorship and whether the stage show and movie would be considered family viewing. Heidi said something like, think of the children, but the three regulars thought that in 1930 there would be very few children in the audience for shows like this. But I think Groucho is on Heidi's side, because at 30 minutes and 50 seconds he points to the camera and says, remember there are children present. At 4640, Groucho describes meeting a polar bear in Africa, and Mrs. Rittenhouse complains that polar bears don't live in Africa. But she doesn't object when Groucho says he met tigers in Africa. Then he goes on to moose and elk. He talks about an elephant too, but he doesn't say whether it was an African or Asian elephant. I think it's more likely it was an Asian elephant, since Asian elephants are smaller, so they are more likely to fit in someone's pajamas. At 53:30, we have the Anvil chorus, with Harpo playing the Anvil part on horseshoes. I think it's pretty clever of Harpo to play this on horseshoes without smashing his fingers. I'm going to ask the same question as last time, since after some discussion in the Facebook group, it seems that Matthew responded, but his response ended up on the cutting room floor. So I'll give Matthew another chance to answer, and Bob another chance to edit him out. And by the way, this makes me realize that Chico should have another item in his price list for playing and then being edited out. My question is, radio and television and motion pictures with sound have existed all my life, and now we have YouTube as well, so I recognize the Anvil chorus, even though I've never been to a production of the opera Il Trovatore. My question is, would most moviegoers in 1930 recognize the Anvil chorus? Groucho's reaction only makes sense to someone who knows the scene in the opera. At 1:11:23, Inspector Hennessy enters, facing away from the camera. That's an odd choice. At 1:17:27, Harpo exits, and then 13 seconds later comes back on screen, suddenly wearing his hat. He wears his hat just long enough to walk down a flight of stairs for 9 seconds, and that's all we see of Harpo's hat after the scene at the start when he entered. I wondered whether Harpo wearing his hat so little is an indication that he was tired of it and didn't regain some enthusiasm for it until he had the idea to distress the hat, so that in their later films his top hat looks quite shabby. Chico, on the other hand, wears his hat all the time when he's on screen. When Groucho entered, he was wearing a pith helmet. Once again, Zeppo gets the short end of the stick. He doesn't have any hat at all in this film. At 1:18:39, Groucho finds red hair, and they conclude that the professor swiped the painting. At 1:18:58, Groucho refers to that little red-headed fellow, the professor. This is the second film in a row that we have clear indications that Harpo is red-haired. At 1:21:30, Chico recapitulates the facts of the case by asking himself questions in a way that I think is very similar to a scene of Inspector Clouseau in one of the Pink Panther movies. Chico says he copied his method from Sherlock Holmes, but I doubt that Sherlock Holmes would want credit for Chico's analysis. At 1:29:18, everyone confesses to the crime, like in Spartacus. At 1:32:40, everyone is knocked out, like in Goldfinger. Lillian Ross had 6 husbands.
Hello, gentlemen, ? Of the council. This is Fred Velez, and this is my opinion of animal crackers. I think they look swell in my soup. Or you want to know about the movie? Okay, I could do that too. Anyway, the first time I recall knowing about animal crackers was around the time that I became aware of the Marx Brothers for the first time, seeing some of their movies on television and also remembering seeing Groucho and Harpo early in 1960s on television, including Groucho's appearance with Jackie Gleason doing the Gallagher and Sheen routine. When I became a Marx Brothers fan, I started seeking out their movies and found a few revivals houses that had them, including the Elgin Cinema in New York City that had Coconuts and Horse Feathers being shown along with Duck Soup and the other great Marx Brothers films. But the one that was always elusive was Animal Crackers. And I was aware of Animal Crackers from the recording clips from the Marx Brothers Decca album, which had Gary Owens as the narrator. So those are the first time I heard anything from the movie, but I still wanted to see the movie. And reading about them in the books that were available at the time, like the Marx Brothers at the movies. So one time I saw a notice, I believe in the Village Voice in the early 70s, of a showing of Animal Crackers at a church in Greenwich Village. So obviously I had to go see it. So I went with my brother and his girlfriend at the time to see the movie. There were a lot of Marx Brothers fans there who were just as anxious as I was. And I remember them playing Marx Brothers songs from Horse Feathers and Duck Soup and a few other of their movies. We waited with bated breath for the movie. We had a great time watching it. I think the print might have been a bootleg print. I think it was a little dark, but still, it was Animal Crackers, and we had a great time watching it. Everybody laughed at the right points of the film. We loved the songs. We loved seeing the brothers in their second film. And then a few years later, Animal Crackers was revived, and I got to see it again at the Sutton Theater with another audience-filled auditorium of Marx fans, and we just applauded everything. We applauded when Margaret Dumont came on. We applauded when Zeppo came on. We applauded when Groucho made his entrance, and then later Chico and Harpo, and we loved all the bits. The biggest laugh, I think, was when Groucho said, well, you got to expect that. Not all jokes can be good. So Animal Crackers I love as one of the best of the Marx Brothers movies. As has been noted in the past, it gives you an idea of what the Marx Brothers were like on the Broadway stage. I know that not everything that was in the original play is in the movie. There's just enough of the movie in there to give you a taste of what the Broadway show was like. In rating of the Paramount films, I would say that Animal Crackers comes right behind Duck Soup as number 2 on the list, with all the others following after that. Animal Crackers holds a special place because it was the movie you wanted to see, and when you finally saw it, you just wanted to see it again and again and again until you got sick of it. But even when you get sick of it, you love it. Anyway, this is Fred Velez speaking to the council, and I bid you adieu.
Hello, Matthew, Noah, Bob, and council members. This is Ben Accardi from Kansas City, Missouri. I want to talk about insouciant whimsy in Animal Crackers. And if that doesn't get your listeners to fast forward 5 minutes, I don't know what will. What is insouciant whimsy? It is a term I've made up for what I think is a Kaufman-Riskin specialty. It's a singular Marx Brothers humor approach that emerges and flourishes in Animal Crackers, fades precipitously in Monkey Business and Horse Feathers, and pretty much disappears by Duck Soup and all the films after. It makes Animal Crackers, and especially Groucho's Captain Spaulding, unique and, in my view, elevates Animal Crackers above the other Marx Brothers films. What I mean by insouciant whimsy are instances like the Lewis Carroll reference in Groucho's opening speech. On one level, it's just a non sequitur. a reference to something seemingly unconnected to what preceded it. But in the Kaufman, Riskin, Captain Spaulding world, it's more sophisticated than your typical non sequitur, because Groucho actually pivots from one character archetype or humor tone to another in his delivery of the seemingly disconnected associations. For example, the Lewis Carroll reference comes right after Groucho pivots from the posture of an entrepreneur proposing a business model founded on blinding people so that you can charge them more, to an insurance salesman that will provide for Mrs. Rittenhouse in her eminent old age, and finally to the posture of a keynote speaker where the walrus and the carpenter reference comes in. The reason I think of these pivots as insouciant is because they come in such quick succession and are delivered in such an incidental tone that you register them as throwaways. A great example of the insouciant tone comes when Groucho gets down on one knee to woo Mrs. Rittenhouse and then apologizes, rolls up a pant leg, and then kneels on the unrolled pant leg nonetheless. His dialogue there barely registers over the whimsical sight gag. You've been affected like this sometimes yourself. Especially when he adds, well, you will be, as an aside to the floor before diving into his romantic pitch. Even though they're treated as throwaways, the density of insouciant whimsy in Animal Crackers is important comedically. I think, in many ways, it functions as a stand-in for the fast-paced, choreographed movement the Marx Brothers were famous for in vaudeville and in most of their other films. Animal Crackers doesn't have any door-slamming, frenetic, farcical scenes or chases or horse races or a lot of physical humor as there is in every other film. The A.B. the Fishman sequence and the card game come closest to relying on humor derived from the energy of the character movement. But even in those sequences, the brothers are not running around, being chased, dexterously entering and exiting rooms, skirmishing with Sylvanian regulars, etc. The Dubarry scene may have served this function in the stage play, but as the film stands, it's absent. I don't know if that's a function of Riskin's screenplay or Hillman's direction, but it's notable and puts emphasis on the verbal whimsy which, like a fast-paced action sequence, keeps your brain bemused and primed for the most memorable punchlines. For example, in the scene where Groucho proposes to Mrs. Rittenhouse and Mrs. Whitehead, the bigamy line is arguably the most memorable, but I think that we are prepped for the big laugh by the breakneck, whimsical turns Groucho makes leading up to it, from the arduous lover looking to get his socks washed, to the frustrated paramour interrupted at the 5-yard line, to the apologetic grammarian mistakenly putting the accent on the subjunctive. In that scene, Groucho pivots from one familiar character type to the next, from one tone to another in such rapid succession that the sheer energy of his shifts keeps the brain tickled until the big laugh is delivered in the bigamy joke. Not all the whimsy in Animal Crackers is delivered in an offhanded way. Groucho's public service intercom voice announcing that no trains will be sold after the magazine leaves the station is a great example of a non sequitur that calls attention to itself. And not all the examples of whimsy are Groucho's. For example, in the Left-Handed Moths dialogue, both Groucho and Chico pivot from detectives to prospective home builders when they realize they will have to construct and design a house next door if they want to question its inhabitants. I think, by the way, this is the only instance of whimsical humor in a Groucho-Chico exchange in all of their movies, the only time in which Chico also pivots wholly from the linear, though nonsensical discussion to a completely new conversation and posture, which underscores the extent to which this kind of humor is a Kaufman-Riskin specialty. Well, I thought my razor was dull until I read this aloud, so I will stop here and thank you for this opportunity to wax academically and drive your listeners away. Thank you for the podcast. I really enjoy and appreciate it. Thanks.
Hi, this is Jimmy Angelina, and I would just like to put a word in for Lillian Roth's performance in Animal Crackers, which the first bunch of times I watched the movie just kind of went right past me, as I think I was just considering it as just another, sort of bland love storyline that took away screen time from the Marx Brothers. However, on a recent viewing, and I'm older now, I was really charmed by her, particularly during Why Am I So Romantic, which is just a really, really delightful performance, and I think so is the rest of her performance in the movie. And just wanted to mention that. I think she's great, and I wondered what you all thought and what you think it would have been like had she had the opportunity to make further movies with the Marx Brothers. Anyway, thank you so much.
Hi, Marx Brothers Council Podcast. This is Grace. My submission is all about Captain Spaulding's litter bearers. Has anybody been able to identify them? Also, to further comment, I've always seen the Marx Brothers as ironically ahead of their time in relation to people of color, while still doing some comedy that is of a time. I think that the racist caricatures depicted in Animal Crackers are much more Eurocentric generalizations, like the ethnicities depicted in the Nutcracker Ballet. The joke, in Groucho's hands, would be an opportune time to have the audience laugh at them. But he makes a cab fare joke that shifts the aspect of them being the joke to a very sound equalist punchline. Of course, this doesn't, in and of itself, afford us to be apologists for the overall insidiousness of racist humor. To me, though, the prize winner for the most explicit is the Cotton Pickers Quartet in the Big Store, followed by the use of the silent film gag standard joke of blacking up to camouflage to get away from the villains of A Day at the Races. Aside from these examples, I think the overall takeaway is, to me, that the Marx Brothers were working within the system of non-white subjugation by finding a way to work within the system and still having room in a coded way to call BS on it. For example, their Native American jokes in the Big Store and Go West are so ridiculous as to not be funny on purpose. The Marx Brothers were exposing an irony in the audience. The humor that the audience wanted had a dark side, and the Marx Brothers didn't want to feed into that.
Hi, this is Eddie Deason. I'm a member of the Marx Brothers Council page, and I love the Marx Brothers Council podcast. They're one of the great joys of my life. Thank you for letting us all be on. I wanted to talk about Animal Crackers. Animal Crackers was the film that got me hooked on the Marx Brothers. I've seen like hundreds, maybe thousands of movies in theaters in my life. There's only 2 movies ever that I went to the theater 4 days in a row to see. One was Charlie Chaplin, The Gentleman Tramp. I saw that in my days in LA back in the 70s. And the first one I ever did it with was Animal Crackers. We were in New York. It was 1974. That magical summer of 74, and I saw Animal Crackers, and I fell in love with the Marx Brothers. I think it was at the Rialto Theater, and the theater was rocking with laughter. I swear to God, it felt like the theater was rocking. There was so much laughter at everything Groucho, Chico, and Harpo did. The theater was rocking. It was great. Animal Crackers is the quintessential Marx Brothers movie, I think. It's the quintessential Groucho role. Captain Jeffrey T. Spaulding, the quintessential Groucho song, Groucho's theme song, Hooray for Captain Spaulding. Groucho has the quintessential look. His hair gets really wild and crazy. It's the Marx Brothers at their craziest. Groucho's hair is so wild and out there in some scenes. It's hilarious. Also, I've always considered the 3 greatest dancers in comedy history to be Groucho Marx, Charlie Chaplin, and Jerry Lewis. Chaplin was like graceful like a woman. Jerry Lewis was like crazy, but he had some great steps. He was very graceful. And Groucho shows his grace. His dance as Captain Spaulding is one of the great dances in history. There's never been moves like that in history. Not Michael Jackson or anybody has ever done moves like that in the history of dance. It's a wonderful dance. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Also, it's a very sweet movie. It's very sweet. Harpo is sweet at the end. It has the sweetest ending where he puts himself to sleep with the girl. I love that ending. It's just a beautiful, wonderful film. And Animal Crackers means a lot to me because I got hooked on the Marx Brothers. It gave me a lifelong love affair with the Marx Brothers, and I love it. Oh, yeah. The leading lady is super cute. That girl, I think it's Lillian Roth. Yeah, and one last thing I wanted to say. I gave my own personal tribute to Animal Crackers, how much I love this movie. I did a movie called I Want to Hold Your Hand in 1978. It was the first film Steven Spielberg ever produced. It was the first film Bob Zemeckis ever directed. Bob later directed me in The Polar Express, and he wrote in 1941, and I love him. He's the best director I ever had. But anyway, you'll see me in the movie. It's a movie about the Beatles, and I play a Beatles in that called Ringo Klaus. I'm the world's greatest Beatles expert. And you'll see a scene in the movie where I go, I'm the greatest Beatles genius in the universe. Ask me anything you want to know about the Beatles. Go ahead, ask me anything. Ask me who the tallest Beatle Beatle was, and the answer come back. John, 5'11". Ask me who the youngest Beatle is, and the answer come back. George, 1943. He was born in 1943. And I do a shtick like that. That scene you'll see, and the answer come back, that's a tribute to the Groucho Chico scene in Animal Crackers. That's how big of an effect this movie had on me. So I have that. It's kind of my legacy to how much I love Animal Crackers. Anyway, I want to say hi to Matthew, Noah, and Bob. You guys, thank you for the Marx Brothers podcast. It's one of the great joys of my life. And I want to wish you all a very happy holiday season. Happy Thanksgiving, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah. And I hope all your Christmas wishes come true. Thank you so much for your wonderful entertainment. Take care. This is Eddie Deason saying goodbye.
Hi, Glenn Davis here. Once again, I'd like to thank the council leaders for providing this opportunity, and I thought I'd take advantage of it to tell you a tale of Animal Crackers and the most special night I ever spent in a movie theater. Well, not counting that one time with Betty Rossetti in high school. Mind you, I don't even remember what movie we saw that night, so I digress. The story I want to tell you happened in 1972. And no, this particular song was not tearing up the charts that year, but this song was one of my big takeaways from the evening in question. It's the spring of '72, the great Marx Brothers revival is at its peak. I'm 16 years old and I've seen their movies a staggering number of times already. I've read everything I could get my hands on, which at that point was pretty much limited to the Al Neal's book, The Marx Brothers at the Movies by Zimmerman and Goldblatt, and Leonard Maltin's movie comedy teams. Even Joe Adamson's doctrine-defining classic had yet to be published. But there was one horrible gap in my Marx viewing, and it was the same as everyone's. None of us had ever seen Animal Crackers. We were very aware of it. It loomed large in the books I just mentioned, and when Groucho turned up on talk shows, he often mentioned it. And here he is with Carson.
I haven't had this outfit on in 30 years. This is true. I wore this in Animal Crackers, and it's been hanging in my closet, waiting for a call. Which unfortunately never came.
Is that where
you know, I opened the closet, and there it hung there. Or would you say hanged?
There it hung?
No, I'd say hung there. And I'm hanging right here, too.
And, of course, whenever he appeared on Dick Cavett, they played him on with Hooray for Captain Spaulding from, you guessed it, Animal Crackers.
Will you welcome one of the landmarks of comedy, a great man, the incomparable Groucho Marx?
And as often as not, he would then break into this song.
Hello, I must be going. I cannot stay. I came to say I must be going. I'm glad I came, but just the same, I must be going.
Also from Animal Crackers. But we couldn't see Animal Crackers due to the much-discussed copyright dispute with the Kaufman estate, not in theaters or on TV in the U.S., and because Canada, where I grew up, was actually considered a part of the U.S. domestic film market, that ban extended to us. Allegedly, it was licensed for Canadian TV, but trust me, it was never on. We scoured the listings every week. Animal Crackers was essentially illegal. It was like you were a Beatles fan and knew all about Sgt. Pepper, but never heard it. Insert derisive comment from Mr. Conium here. And then one fateful day in April of 1972, I saw a newspaper ad for an upcoming week at a repertory theater. The more or less obligatory Hirschfeld cartoons of the boys advertised a Marx Brothers festival, and as my eyes drifted up the chronological schedule, my heart nearly stopped. Right there, second from the top, in between Coconuts and Monkey Business, they listed 2 nights of Animal Crackers. I was going to see Animal Crackers. Now, I was born and raised in Montreal in the 60s and 70s. If you ever plan to be born and raised in a particular time and place, I heartily recommend the 60s and 70s in Montreal. Not so much a city as a theme park. Perhaps the most storied and notorious street in Montreal was St. Lawrence Boulevard, Boulevard Saint-Laurent, known locally as the Main. This was a bustling, boisterous, multi-ethnic street that stood as the dividing line between East and West, French and English Montreal, and served as the entranceway for generations of immigrants to the city. And none put a more vivid mark on the area than the Jewish community, creating a vibrant, unique culture that gave the world Saul Bellow, Mordecai Richler, and Leonard Cohen, not to mention the world's finest bagels and smoked brisket. Now, All of this may seem like another digression, but it isn't, because the film was showing in a theater on the Main, a tremendously appropriate venue. The Verdi Theater had opened in 1912, when the brothers were still appearing live in Montreal on the vaudeville circuit. It was by no means a movie palace, it was a neighborhood theater, but it was the right vintage and the right neighborhood. Heck, in the 20s it had been a Yiddish movie house. I couldn't think of a better place in town to see Animal Crackers. As it turned out, I was not the first member of my family to head east on the island of Montreal to see the Marx Brothers. My own father was a first-generation Marx Brothers fan. He had been in his late teens and early 20s when their films were first released, just as I was during the revival. And he and his friends used to journey across town to see the latest Marx release in English in a theater in a predominantly French area of town. Why? Because although the French audiences loved the brothers, they didn't get all the jokes. How could they? That meant that the laughter wasn't so loud that it drowned out the next three lines. Before Irving Thalberg ever got his hands on the boys, my dad and his pals had figured out a way not to miss out on any of the jokes. When I got inside the Verdi that night, the excitement was palpable. All 500 seats were filled and there was an overfull crowd in the aisles. This was clearly in contravention of the fire laws, but come on, it's Animal Crackers. Finally, the lights went down, an image flickered on the screen, and I felt horror. An MGM logo appeared. Oh my God, had I misread the schedule? Had there been some change? Had there been a raid by the copyright police? Oh, please don't let it be the big store. A millisecond later, blessed relief. As befitted a screening of a film from 1930, the Verdi was giving us a short before the feature, Laurel and Hardy's County Hospital. Now, I love Laurel and Hardy, and County Hospital has some big laughs in it, but I couldn't wait for it to be over.
Hard-boiled eggs and nuts.
And then it finally happened. The first thing I noticed was the MCA logo. It wasn't there, just the Paramount Mountain. This was an old print, how old I would soon come to appreciate. When the title flashed on the screen, an immense roar shook the theater. The reactions from the beginning and the rest of the way were like something you'd hear at some huge live event, not at a movie. The crowd was loaded for bear. Zeppo's entrance got a big cheer. Mind you, I think Animal Crackers provides him with the best entrance of any of the films.
Mr. Horatio W. Jamison, Field Secretary to Captain Spaulding.
Love that music. Of course, the first big moment in Animal Crackers is Groucho's entrance. The audience reacted almost as though the man himself was entering on the Broadway stage. Now, the print was in terrible shape, full of splices and clicks and pops and scratches on the image, but we didn't care. We were seeing the Marx Brothers movie we'd never been allowed to see. In fact, we still weren't officially allowed to see it, which made the whole thing all the more satisfying. The oddity was, while I had never seen Animal Crackers, I'd heard some of it over and over again. Clips of it could be found on the Decca Records album compiling some great Marx moments. The album is perhaps best remembered today as the source of bumper music for a certain beloved podcast. But having heard Hooray for Captain Spaulding was no preparation for seeing Groucho perform his dance routine. The audience roared at the corkscrew leg kicks. I won't bore you with detailed reactions to each scene. Suffice it to say, I have literally never heard such laughter at a movie in my life. But a couple of moments do stand out in my memory these 50 plus years on. One was the bridge scene, which made me helpless with laughter, and it has some of Chico's best asides, and I love Chico's asides.
That's a good guy. He plays a good game. Yes, he can't take it there.
The other was the scene in which the brothers perform for the guests at Rittenhouse Manor. Groucho gives his Africa speech, of course. Now, this was particularly strange to me as, again, courtesy of the Decca album, I had memorized this speech and given it in a high school public speaking competition. It went over better with my fellow students than with the teachers. Chico's endless piano recital and the interplay with Groucho absolutely killed, and that's where one very interesting thing occurred. Groucho had a line.
Play the song about Montreal. Montreal. I'm a dreamer, Montreal.
A buzz went through the audience. Hey, they mentioned our hometown. But there was no laugh. No one got the joke. This was, of course, pre-internet, even pre-Conium. we were left to wonder. Eventually, the film came to an end, and as the lights came up, the audience stood and roared like I've never seen in a movie theater. It went on and on as though they were summoning the brothers to come back and take a curtain call. When I got home, I immediately asked my parents about the mystery joke. They explained that there was a popular song of the day called I'm a Dreamer, Aren't We All? I felt satisfaction discovering that, but I didn't laugh. You can either tell a joke or explain it, but you can't do both. But since I heard the joke before I ever heard the song, in my head the song itself was always I'm a Dreamer, Montreal. So imagine my shock and delight a half-century later when I heard, in Noah Diamond's wonderful If You Get Near a Song, Play It, a charming version of the song performed by Amanda Sisk that brought to life the interpretation previously heard only in my fevered brain.
Just a dreamer, Montreal.
I hope including that clip hasn't sparked some new copyright battle like the one that kept Animal Crackers under wraps for so many years. That prohibition finally came to an end thanks to the efforts of Steve Stoliar and the re-release of the film in '74. I duly trooped to the theater as soon as it was out to see a new print, which was vastly superior to the one I had seen. And the most recent Blu-ray restoration was better yet. But for me, nothing will ever match the excitement of seeing that battered bootleg screening back in '72. It was, as I said, the finest night I've ever spent in a movie theater. Except for Betty Rossetti in high school. Oh, who am I kidding? I just made that part up. I should have been so lucky. Meaning that to this day, I have never had a better time at the movies, or with the Marx Brothers, than my night at the Verdi.